books in January, which doesn't really feel like a lot compared to what I'm used to reading compared to previous months. But I also feel like I had a really rich reading month this month in January. I feel like I was able to engage in the stories that I was reading and found myself really captivated by the characters. So even though it felt like a light month in terms of books actually finished, it felt like a really excellent reading month. Hello, I'm Valerie Geary. Welcome to the Book Nook. I started out 2025 setting a reading goal for myself where I wanted to read as many books from my own shelves as possible. I started out the year with about 290 books, both physical and digital. And even though I don't think I'll be able to read through the entire 290 books this year, I do want to try and make some headway in clearing out some of these shelves. Some of these books have been here for a really long time. I will make sure to link to the video where I introduce this challenge and talk about the rules and what I'm doing. But basically, I started out with 290 unread books, and now here we are at the end of January, beginning of February. I do feel like I might need to pick up the pace a little bit if I want to try and read as many of these books on my shelves as possible, but I also want to enjoy my reading, and sometimes that means reading a little bit slower than normal, really taking the time with the books and with the characters. So I have read 3 books from my own shelves and 1 library book, which was for one of my in-person book clubs. I also did unhaul 5 books from my shelves that I was never going to get around to reading. I will link that video below as well. And then there were a couple of books that I read in December when I was really actually starting to think about this challenge. And I'm counting them this month as books that I have read from my own shelves. So where I stand now, started the month with 290 books. I am finishing the month with 280. So we're making progress. I think that's about 3% of my shelves. So if that current reading trend keeps up, maybe I'll get around to reading about 30 to 40% of my shelves by the end of the year. Would love to read down 50%, but we'll see how it goes. Honestly, all progress is good progress, but the ones that I did read this month, with the exception of 1, I really enjoyed. So let's get into it. The first book that I read in January from my own shelves was The Wildlands by Abbi Geni. A few years back, I read Abbi Geni's debut novel, The Lightkeepers, and found myself absolutely enthralled with her storytelling capabilities, and I was hoping to find the same frenzied plot and engaging characters in The Wildlands that I did in The Lightkeepers, and I was not disappointed. This book starts when a Category 5 tornado ravages a small town in Oklahoma. More importantly, it devastates the McLeod family and leaves them absolutely reeling. The rest of this book is them basically picking up the trauma of their lives. We follow 2 of the McLeod sisters, one who is I think 9 when the book starts and the other is 18, an older teenager. The older teenager ends up being responsible for the rest of her family, and this book moves between the 2 McLeod sisters as they tell the story of their brother who went missing shortly after the tornado hit the town, only to return several years later with a desperate and dangerous plan to start a war on human civilization. This book is wild. It's part coming of age, part climate fiction, part eco-thriller. It's also a very character-driven book, and it was slow in some places with some really challenging themes, but the end absolutely delivered for me, and I found myself utterly engaged with the entire McLeod family, with all of the decisions, good, bad, terrible, that they were making as they tried to kind of hold on to some semblance of their old life and their old family, some idea of who they used to be. I found myself equal parts devastated, shocked, emotional, horrified, hopeful, and deeply moved. Everything I look for in a good book. So The Wildlands was a great way to start out the year, and I'm definitely glad that I finally got around to reading this book, which has been on my shelves for over 5 years, I want to say. 6 years maybe. One thing I'm also proud of this month is that I didn't actually acquire any new books for my shelves. I did purchase 1 book for my in-person mystery book club, That is the one purchase that I'm allowing myself every month because it's a book that comes in and I immediately read it, so it's not adding to the count of my to be read shelves. I also checked out one book from the library, which was for another in-person book club that I'm a part of, and I did read that one. Now, the Edgar Award nominees for 2025 are recently announced, and if you have spent any time on my channel, you know that I am a big fan of reading through the Edgar Awards. I have a great time every year kind of reading through some of the nominees, and so that's going to blow my reading from the library rule out of the water. I'm going to have to check out some books and read those and not read what's on my shelf for a little while, but I am going to try and keep it even, you know, one book from the library, one book from my shelf, one Edgar nominee, one book from my shelf, that kind of thing, to try and keep up the momentum that I am getting with reading through my own shelves. So yeah, the Edgar Awards are throwing everything into chaos, but we're just gonna roll with it. So the book that I acquired this month, I also read, and that book came from my mystery book club that I'm a part of. And I get sent these books from the person who runs the book club, and I never really know what book is gonna come in the mail. I'm always usually pleasantly surprised by the pick. This month, I absolutely loved the choice that was made. We read The Chuckling Fingers by Mabel Seeley. This book was actually published in 1941 and was promoted as the best mystery of 1941. I don't really know what other books were being published in 1941, but I do agree that this was one of the better mysteries that I have read. I certainly had a great time reading it. I enjoyed it so much that I immediately passed it on to a friend who also likes reading mysteries. This book is very atmospheric. It's set in Minnesota. It has some cozy-ish Agatha Christie vibes. It features a Minnesota lumber tycoon whose family is beset with all these unsettling series of events. Our intrepid detective is a young woman who comes to this cabin in the woods to help her friend try and clear her name and her reputation, and instead she finds herself entangled in a very dysfunctional family history. There are hooded figures lurking in the night, smashed boats, more bodies dropping than pine cones from a pine tree, the threat of danger around every corner, some heavy-handed foreshadowing, a shocking reveal. This was just a pleasurable mystery novel to read. The other in-person book club that I'm a part of doesn't have a specific genre, but for the first quarter of this year, we have decided to read books set in space. Our first pick was Walk the Vanished Earth by Erin Swan, which is partially set on a dying Earth and partially set on a very dusty, futuristic Mars. This book has multiple narrators and so many time leaps that you're going to need to buckle in to understand where and when and who you are with in this world or on Mars. It's a literary dystopian novel that straddles the line between fantasy and reality, mixing a sweeping family epic with climate fiction elements. The focus really is on this one man's dream for how to save the planet after it starts dying, and all the ripples of that dream throughout his family's life and the way that it affects his future progeny, their future progeny. This book initiated a very lively conversation in my group as we struggled to kind of understand what the point of this book was, what the author was trying to say with the choices that she made, the decisions she made about the story and the plot. There was a lot to say about trauma and about following one person's dream, perhaps to your own detriment. There was a lot to say about violence and climate collapse and wandering a red, lonely planet, trying to figure out where you belong in this world. And at times it did feel like there was almost too much going on, that it lacked a little bit of focus. Ultimately, it made it a little bit less impactful at the end when we reach our grand conclusion. The writing in this book, however, was stunning. I just wish a little bit more attention had been paid to the plot and to the layers of the characters, so that we could get the full breadth and depth of what this book was trying to do, rather than feeling, I don't know, a little bit lackluster about it, a little bit like something was missing, but we couldn't quite pinpoint what. I would say if you liked Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, if you liked The New Wilderness by Diane Cook, or After the Flood by Kassandra Montag, this book may be a book that's up your alley. Alternatively, if you read this book and are looking for something similar, those three books would be a great place to start. My final read of the month was The Lying Game by Ruth Ware, which I picked to fit the Buzz Wordathon prompt for January, which was truth or lies. The Lying Game fits that prompt, and I was so disappointed in this book. It was a very disheartening way to end a otherwise really good reading month. I got done with it and just was feeling so blah about it that I wished I had just unhauled it without reading it and picked up a different book for this January Buzzwordathon prompt. The premise of The Lying Game is one that we've seen before. A body washes up in a small town. A group of friends gather again to try and keep the secret that they have been keeping for decades under wraps, even as the police begin to investigate, even as their lies begin to crumble. Unfortunately for me, this one lacked any real tension or any real unique elements. This book was almost 400 pages. There were a lot of words, but not a lot was said. There wasn't a whole lot going on with the character development or really with the plot. We just saw a lot of kind of the same scenes over and over again, and the characters worrying about a lot of the same things. Everyone just felt a little bit too naive to be involved in this big scandal that was supposedly happening throughout the book. The characters also made like a huge deal out of small things and really catastrophized a lot, turning small things into very big things so that when the final reveal happened, everything just felt kind of like anticlimactic, like a sad little balloon going blue. Also, the other thing that really bugged me about this book is that the main character, the main narrator, who we follow the entire story, has a young baby with her. I am not against mothers in fiction. I like reading books about mothers, mother-daughter stories, books about women figuring out motherhood, but this just felt really separate from the plot. It felt really unnecessary for this woman to bring her infant child to this house that is falling into the ocean, into this situation where there may have very well been a murderer on the loose. These women were in danger in one way or the other, and the main character's like, I'm just gonna bring my baby here. Not because there was no one to watch her. Oh no, the baby's father was in London the entire time, perfectly capable of caring for this child. He was just gonna stay home that weekend anyway and like do up the nursery, so she could have just left the baby with him. It was all just very weird. It didn't really make sense as to why the main character had this subplot of being a mother very attached to her child. The author tried to connect it to the main storyline, but it just didn't work for me. I probably should have dropped this one like a hot potato. I did end up skimming a lot of it towards the end. I really wish I had just given up on it. I was really hoping for something to happen at the end to kind of turn it around and change my mind, but that didn't happen. This is my fourth Ruth Ware book, and I think it's going to be my last. I haven't really enjoyed any of the books of hers that I've read. I think there was one that I had a good time reading but found to be kind of ridiculous, but still like enjoyed it. And then the other three, including The Lying Game, I just was like, ugh, I don't like this. I don't like the characters. I'm not engaged in the plot. I'm not intrigued by the characters. There's not a whole lot going on here that I want to invest my time in. So maybe I have finally learned my lesson this month, and maybe The Lying Game is the last Ruth Ware book that I will ever pick up. Or maybe she will pull me in again with some intriguing premise and very cool cover. That's my little stack for January. Those are the 4 books that I read this month. I would love to know what you were reading in January, and if you found any new favorites, or any that you immediately wanted to throw against the wall. Let me know in the comments. Thank you for joining me here today in the Book Nook. I hope you had fun. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.